Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. So, today, we have looked at various news outlets, some of the mainstream media outlets, even including pro-Ukrainian sites. Some of the news, some of the discussion topics that are coming out of these news outlets is the following. According to the U.S. State Department, Ukraine has the right and opportunity to reclaim the territories currently under occupation by Russia and reinstate its internationally recognized borders it had when it became an independent state in 1991. State Department spokesman Matthew Miller made the statement during a briefing in Washington on May 25th. Miller was responding to the question of whether U.S. assistance is aimed at restoring Ukraine's 1991 borders. We believe that Ukraine has the opportunity and right, and we support Ukraine in protecting its sovereignty and territorial integrity, Miller said. He said this applied to all temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine, including Crimea. Miller said that the U.S. strongly denounces the agreements between Moscow and Minsk, Belarus, regarding the placement of Russian tactical nuclear weapons within Belarusian territory. And that leads us to our next topic, the deployment of Russian tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus. It's happening. It's happening as we speak. The Russians are moving tactical nuclear weapons ranging from 0.5 upwards to 15 kilotons into Belarus. Now, why are the Russians doing that? Well, I think the reason is very clear. It cannot be more clear than what we are seeing on the ground right now. And that is the simple fact that if the Russian military, for some reason, is conventionally defeated with the support of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization in the United States in the land corridor between Russia proper and the Kherson Oblast, then we could possibly see the authorization for the release of tactical nuclear weapons by the Russian Federation, especially, and I say this as, and you have to understand, this is a big if. This is if Ukrainian forces are militarily successful in threatening the Crimean Peninsula. I believe at this point the Russians have firmly made up their mind that the Crimean Peninsula is Russian. And, again, unfortunately for the Ukrainians, if you're on the side of the Ukrainian state, the Russians have a standing claim to Crimea. And from the Russian point of view, I think if things looked differently than they do right now, okay, and what I mean by that is if the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, had not expanded into Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, accepted Poland, accepted Romania, I believe that the Russians would look upon the Crimean peninsula scenario question a little bit differently. But look, NATO expanded its reach to the very borders of the Russian Federation. Territory, states that were once part of the Soviet Union are now part of NATO. Prior to the Soviet Union, Crimea was part of Russia. Crimea was not transferred to Ukraine until late in the Cold War by Nikita Khrushchev. It had not been an historical part of what you would define as the area of the borderlands. This is the borderlands. Ukraine. The borderlands to Western Europe. That's what Ukraine means. The borderlands does not mean, for the Russian point of view, for the Russian perception, and you have to understand the Russian perception because this is how wars start. The borderlands does not mean Kharkov. It does not mean Mariupol. It does not mean Crimea. The borderlands. Russian perception. I get there's disagreements around the current territory of Ukraine. But again, from a historical perspective, it's not always looked like this. And especially when you factor in the issue of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Romania, all joining the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. But now you have tactical nuclear weapons that are being brought into Belarus. So is it posturing? Or are the Russians contemplating the possible use of tactical nuclear weapons? Look, if we go back, and I tend to do this probably more than I should, if we go back to the Spanish Civil War. The Spanish Civil War was the first war that led up to World War II. That and the Winter War between the Soviets and Finland. But the Spanish Civil War was this great testing ground. This war that was taking place between left and right, monarchist, anarchists, socialist, communist, fascists, normal people in Spain. But that Spanish Civil War led to and ultimately segued into World War II. Testing ground. Is what we're seeing right now happening in Ukraine the new Spain? Is it the testing ground prior to global world war between possibly the Russian Federation, China, Iran, Venezuela, North Korea, possibly a number of other states, against the Western states? The United States. Does Europe get into it? Does Europe stay out of it? What happens? Difficult to say. But we're heading in a direction right now that eventually could very well lead to a global third world war. This is what normally happens. What's happening right now has happened in the past. We humans like to fight. We like to wage war upon one another. This is what we do. We're an inherently aggressive species. Nothing has changed as far as humanity is concerned in the way we act towards one another between the 1930s, the 1940s, 1916, 1915, nothing. It's the same, just different technology. And that very technology that has not been used for quite some time, at least in terms of the way we're seeing it now, obviously, where does it end? Where does it take us? Well, difficult to say. But I do believe at this point the Russians are not giving up Crimea. The Russians will use nuclear weapons before they give up the Crimean Peninsula. Absolutely. And then compounding that, I'm not so sure even conventionally the Ukrainians have the ability to threaten the Crimea. I think that's a lot of talk, but at the same time, it puts essentially no end in sight of the current conflict. These two sides look to be wanting to fight this out for quite some time. And again, that gives us more opportunity for possible escalation into something greater, something much greater. So again, there hasn't been a lot of movement on the deep state map in terms of Bakhmut. Obviously, a few days ago we were hearing about the Ukrainians were in the process of enveloping Bakhmut by the mainstream media here in the United States. Obviously, that did not happen. Once the Ukrainians lost Bakhmut, yes, there were some probing attacks to the north and to the south, but essentially Bakhmut remains under Russian control at this time. Also, the Ukrainian counteroffensive, the highly touted Ukrainian counteroffensive in the south near Orikhiv has been paused. It sounds like the Germans, a number of European states, are going to continue to augment and supply the Ukrainians with additional weapons. We suspect some of those weapons that have already been sent to the Ukrainians have been destroyed by Russian air attacks. The Russians continue anywhere from 30 to 100 airstrikes per day against targets in Ukraine. They continue to launch cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, drones at Ukrainian targets. So just because the lines are not shifting, that does not mean that there is a decrease in military activity, especially artillery and airstrikes. This is continuing, and especially on the Russian side. They continue to degrade and try to destroy the Ukrainian military on the ground, especially near the line of contact. So that's kind of where we're at for today. Again, watching the situation within Belarus, the tactical nuclear weapons being deployed to Belarus. That is not small. That is not a small issue. It's something that we need to be aware of and continue to watch. So that does it for today. More to come very, very soon. As always, have a good day.